In this video, we very clearly show you what happens to your Social Security payment if you leave the workforce early. Coming up next on Holy Schmidt.
Holy Schmidt!
There are a lot of reasons to retire before age 62, the earliest age at which you can collect Social Security. The biggest one, of course, is that we only have so many years ahead of us, and we'd like to spend a lot of those enjoying retirement. But how does that affect the size of your Social Security payment? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you what happens to your Social Security payment when you retire at age 60, 55, 50, and 45. All right, let's get into it. Let's start off with one point that is very important, but a lot of people miss, and that is even if you retire early, you don't need to start collecting Social Security when you retire. In fact, you can retire at age 65 and still wait to collect Social Security. The two don't necessarily have to go hand in hand, although often they do because people need the funding. In this video, I'm going to show you what happens to your Social Security payment if you retire early and you claim it at age 67. For most of you, that's full retirement age, or age 62, the earliest possible point at which you can claim Social Security. In order to understand the answer to this question, you need just a bit of information. The first, what's the average Social Security payment for someone retiring in 2024 at full retirement age? In this case, we'll assume age 67. In 2024, the average Social Security payment for someone claiming at full retirement age was $1,884 per month. A Social Security payment of $1,884 per month represents an average earnings of about $45,115 per year in today's dollars. In fact, everything the Social Security Administration does is in today's dollars. They'll take your historical earnings and they'll use a wage index and bring it into today's dollars. And so for that number, 1884, for 35 years, you need to earn $45,115 per year. And I'm going to show you exactly how it's done using fourth grade math. So here we go. Your Social Security payment is basically two calculations. The sum of your best 35 years of earnings, indexed in today's dollars, all of that's added together, that's in the numerator, and that number is divided by 420. So $45,115 for 35 years is $1,579,025. That is what the average person filing for Social Security earns over a lifetime, at least the best 35 years of their earnings over a 35-year period. Now, Jeff, you keep saying historical earnings are indexed to today's dollars. What does that actually mean? It means that your best 35 years of earnings are multiplied by what's called a wage index factor. Wage indexing factors take historical earnings and index them into today's dollars. For example, if you went back to 1990, the wage indexing factor was 3.16. You take 14,276.90, multiply it times 3.16, and this becomes $45,115. Fast forward 10 years to the year 2000, the wage indexing factor was 2.07. That means in order to get to the same $45,115 today, you would have earned $21,794.69, multiply that times 2.07, and come up with $45,115. The closer you get to today, the smaller the number becomes, and eventually it becomes 1. That's called wage indexing, and if the SSA did not do this to your historical earnings, you get a tiny Social Security payment. The SSA does this for all of your historical earnings, and then takes the best 35 years and adds them all together. The person who receives $1,884 a month has an average lifetime earning of $1,579,025. Of course, if you're average, you're not going to have exactly $45,115 per year in today's dollars and earnings every single year. In your beginning years of your career, you're going to have less, and in your ending years, you're going to have more. But it's really easy to assume that the way you got to that 1.579 million was an average of 45,000. It's important to note that it's the 1.579 million in the numerator that's important, not how you got there. So where does the 420 come from? Well, 35 years of earnings times 12 months per year is 420. All information from the SSA is expressed in monthly payments. They don't generally tell you you make $20,000, $30,000 per year, whatever the number is that they pay you. They tell you how much you receive per month, $1,884 per month. 420 months is a 35-year period. So in the numerator, you have your best 35 years of earnings indexed to today's dollars, all added together. And in the denominator, you have 420 months. What is the output of that, and why does that matter? Well, if you divide $1,579,025 by 35, you come up with $3,759.58 per month. The $3,759.58 isn't what you're going to receive from the SSA, by the way. That's just, on average, how much you earn per month over the last 35 years, your best 35 years in today's dollars. But it's a very important number, and you want that number to be as big as possible because that number is going to be fed into a very simple formula to determine what your Social Security payment is going to be at full retirement age. And how do you get a bigger number? Well, you increase the size of the numerator. How does it get smaller? Well, you decrease the size of the numerator, meaning you work less than 35 years, or you have low earnings years during that 35-year period. Just to test this a little bit, let me just give you an example. What happens if you work only half as many years, 17 and a half years, not 35, but you earn twice as much? That's $90,230 per year in today's dollars. Well, that still equals $1,579,025, which is still $3,759.58 per month. If you earn twice as much, but you work half the number of years, do you get the same Social Security payment? Yes, most of the time, unless you earn so much that you reach the earnings cap, but for most of you, you're not going to be at that point. So remember, it's the total amount in the numerator which is going to determine the size of your Social Security payment. So half the number of years, but double the income is still going to give you the same payment because it's always divided by 420. So what do you do with that $3,759.58 per month of average indexed monthly earnings if you're not going to get paid $3,759.58? Well, you're going to take it and you're going to use a very simple formula called bend points. I call bend points a great equalizer because it's a formula that helps people with low income receive a much higher proportion of their Social Security contribution back in payment than someone who makes a lot of money. And I'll explain to you exactly why that's important here. The bend points number is a formula that changes every year, but for 2024, the SSA gives you 90% of your first $1,174 of average index monthly earnings. Remember that number that we talked about before, that $3,759.58 per month, that's your average index monthly earnings. The SSA is going to give you 90% of your first $1,174 of that. And then they're going to give you 32% of any amount above that number. So if you have an average index monthly earnings of $3,759.58, you'll receive 90% of the first $1,174. That's $1,056.60. And you'll get 32% of the remaining $2,585.63. That's $827. $1,056.60 plus $827.40 is $1,884. And by the way, if you had a very long and profitable career and your average index monthly earnings was above $7,078, anything above that is multiplied by 15% up to the Social Security wage cap. In 2024, the wage cap is $14,050 per month or $168,600 per year. The SSA does not tax you on any earnings in excess of $168,600, nor do you get paid additional Social Security benefits on earnings above $168,600. So if maximizing your Social Security payment is all about maximizing the amount of money in the numerator and dividing it by 420 and feeding it into the formula, what happens if you don't have 35 years of earnings? Or if you have 35 years of earnings, but the first 15 years were not great? Well, the dollar amount in the numerator is going to go down, and it's still going to be divided by 420, so you're going to get a smaller payment. And if you don't work 35 years, if you work 25 years or even 15 years, the SSA is going to give you zeros for the rest of those years. And those zeros will be added to the amount that you have in the denominator. And you'll still have the same amount, zeros for the years that you didn't work. So when thinking about what happens if you retire early, just remember that the size of your Social Security payment is all about the size of the sum of everything that goes in the numerator, because it's always divided by 420. So let's make some adjustments, assuming that instead of working 35 years, you work less. By the way, I'm going to do this all on a spreadsheet, and I'll make the spreadsheet available to you on my website if you want to tinker with it. with the caveat that it's for illustrative purposes only. Now let's make some assumptions here. Let's assume that you started working at age 26, or you worked earlier, but those weren't really big earnings years, so your best years started at age 26, and you worked for 35 years. Same assumption, started at 26 and you worked for 30 years. Same assumption, 26 and you worked for 25 years. And finally, same assumption, you started at 26 and you worked for 20 years. So in scenario 1, you retired at age 60. Scenario 2, you retired at age 55. Scenario 3, you retired at age 50. And scenario 4, you retired at age 45. And we're going to go through these really quickly, and it'll be super obvious once you see the pattern here. So using the previous numbers and assuming your average in terms of your income, and you work for 35 years, you will have 35 years of earnings that total $1,579,025. This is something you already saw. This is what we just did. Remember that this amount was divided by 420, and that gave you an average index monthly earnings number of $3,759.58. And the payment was $1,884. But what happens if you retire at age 55? Everything else stays the same, but you're retiring 5 years earlier. First, your total lifetime earnings indexed to today's dollars goes down. Your total lifetime earnings goes down to $1,353,450. And your average index monthly earnings becomes $3,233.50. Feed that into the formula and your new Social Security payment is $1,712. So even though your lifetime earnings went down 14.3%, your new Social Security payment went from $1,884 down to $1,712, which is down 9.1%. How did your earnings go down 14.3%, but your payment only went down 9.1%? Remember the great equalizer, bend points. In the first example, you got 90% of the first $1,174, which was $1,056, and 32% of the remaining balance. But what happens if the remaining balance goes down? Well, you lose 32 cents of every dollar drops, not 90 cents of every dollar drops. What happens if you retire after 25 years of work instead of 35 years? So you're retiring at age 50. Your total lifetime earnings goes down to $1,127,875, and your average index monthly earnings drops to $2,685.42. And your new Social Security payment is $1,540. So your lifetime earnings went down 28%, 28.5%, but your new Social Security payment went down 18.3%. It went from $1,884 down to $1,540. So that's down 18.3%. Now what happens if you retire at 45 years old, 20 years in the workforce? By the way, if this is you, well done, but here's how your Social Security payment will play out. Your total lifetime earnings goes down to $902,300, and your average indexed monthly earnings drops to $2,148.33. And your new Social Security payment is $1,368 at full retirement age. And all these numbers that you're getting are your payment at full retirement age, but if you draw early, it's going to go down. And I'm going to show you very quickly at the end how much it'll go down. So your lifetime earnings went down a whopping 42.9%, but your new Social Security payment went from $1,884 down to $1,368, which is down 27.4%. Now you have all the numbers, assuming you retired at full retirement age. We assume that that's age 67. But what if it was 62 or 63? Well, you need to make a simple adjustment. If you file for Social Security at age 62, you get 70% of your full retirement age payment. If you file at age 63, you get 75%. At age 64, you get 80%. At age 65, you get 86.66%. At age 66, you get 93.33%. And at age 67, full retirement age, you get 100% of your full retirement age payment, of course. And just for completeness, what if you waited until age 68, 69, 70? At age 68, you get 108% of your full retirement age payment. At age 69, you get 116%. And at age 70, you get 124%. So, in other words, a little less time in the workforce isn't going to hurt your Social Security payment much. A lot less time will have a significant impact. And then if you overlay drawing early versus at full retirement age, well, that's going to have a huge impact on the size of your Social Security payment. If you'd like to play around with this spreadsheet, go to holyschmidt.com/early retirement. Obviously, as I said before, it's for illustrative purposes only. Your specific situation is going to be a lot different. Also, if you like this video, check out that video, how to pay no tax on Social Security. This is Jeff Schmidt, and I will see you in that video right there.